All right, continuing where we left off the last time, talking about punctuation reviewing. Right, it's a grammar review, so we're talking about punctuations, and we covered the initial capitalization, right, which is required at the beginning of sentences and with proper nouns and with titles and abbreviations. Right. Next up, we have, I believe, did we cover?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. With the full stops. So the full stops, as you would imagine, are used at the end of a complete sentence. Right, and so you can take any sentence as an example. Take any sentence as an example, and you add a full stop at the end. And this is surprisingly important to highlight because students tend to not do this for some reason. Then you have full stops being used with initials. Right, so initials are when only the uh, first letter of a word is written, not the whole thing. So, as an example, you've got, right, uh, S A Khalik, right, and I believe this is the name of a shop actually, right, over here. And so, right, the full form is perhaps Sayyid Ahmad or Sayyid Abdul Khalik. And so the instead of writing the full thing, right, the first two names, the first name and the middle name, right, have been abbreviated just as SA. And this could be done with any name, but right, more so with ones that are generally understood, right? So if I see a name that is M Bilal, right, I would automatically know that that M stands for Muhammad, right? So the right how this is used perhaps does have a cultural aspect to it as well. And then, right, they're used with abbreviations. So, as an example, right, writing etc and then putting a dot because it's an abbreviation for a longer word which is etc, right? So that's actually the full form of the word, etc. Okay. Another example would be prof, which is short for professor. My whiteboard seems to be lagging for some reason. There you go. Right, so that's for full stops. Then you have question marks and exclamation marks. So question marks obviously, right, are used at the end of a sentence at a question as a question. So interrogatives used at end of questions. And then I believe there's a sort of different use for this, and that is right to express confusion. Right now, the example for that is it is primarily a question. It's just the tone, right? The tone will set whether it's expressing confusion or not. So I wouldn't take it as a separate use of the question mark. Right now, the way you say this, right, could be a simple, straightforward question. It could express confusion. So it's more about tone. Then you have the exclamation mark, right? And that is used to, represent something that you want to express with certain strong feeling or emotion, right? So something that is more expressive and uh, right, it is a punctuation mark that you would use in uh, informal writing, right? You wouldn't want to use this in anything that is being written with a formal tone. So the exclamation mark is used to indicate an exclamative clause, and that's a fancy term, right? We've done exclamatory sentences, so that's basically what they're pointing to. Or, right, exclamative expression in informal writing. So it could be something as simple as listen, right? And if it's being said loudly or with a lot of emotion or expression, or something like right. And in these cases, you could perhaps add more than one exclamation mark, right? Just to show the intensity of the expression. Then we come to commas, which have more than one use and, right, are important. They have an important role. They come in second to the full stop, right? Not counting capitalization. And again, right, for some reason, students tend to mix them up as to where they could or could not be used, can or cannot be used. So, okay, so the question is using too much commas. Well, yes, obviously, if you're using them without, you know, taking into consideration whether they should be used, you're just randomly putting in commas, then obviously that will not work in your favor. Do examiners have a preference for this? Not at all. There is no preference as far as the examiners are concerned. If you've used your commas properly, then, right, you will be graded positively. If you've used them incorrectly, then obviously they'll affect the quality of your writing. Again, it depends on what exactly it is that you're writing, right? If you're listing too many words using commas, it depends on what it is that you're writing. Okay, so commas are used to separate a list of similar words of phrases, such as, it is important to write in clear, simple, accurate words. So you can see I've used commas to separate these. Another example would be remember. So remember to get eggs, bread, and milk. Now, right, I want to highlight this comma over here, right, this one. Right, so when you have a list and you have multiple items, so you're going to use and before the last item on the list. Now there's a sort of, I don't know whether I should call it a debate, or there is a uh, difference in opinion, difference in usage as far as this comma is concerned. This one is called the Oxford comma, and apparently it is something that is preferred to be used in American English, not so much in British, perhaps, if I've read it properly. Uh, And the reason they give for this is it makes it very clear that the last two items are separate items and not, related in some way, right? And an example from a meme for this one is, right? I and like the examples they give tend to be very like far fetched. So I saw two alligators, right? Uh, a celebrity and a writer. Now, this isn't the example from the meme, it was something else. But now, what they tend to, you know, argue is that because you have not put a comma over here, the Oxford comma, you haven't used that. And so this sort of hints towards that the alligators, one of the alligators was a celebrity and the other alligator was a writer, right? Whereas if you put the comma, then that removes the confusion that, oh no, right, the alligators are separate from the celebrity and the writer, right? So there are three different things you're talking about, and you're not talking about the alligators being celebrities and writers. Now, as I said, right, the examples that they offer are, right, far-fetched. There might be a genuine case where it would cause confusion if a comma is not included. And so, because it is something that is part of grammar, I generally tend to use it, right? It just makes it simpler. No, not based on examples like these, right? So but generally, right, it's valid, so there's no harm in doing it, right? And it just makes it clearer than it would be. Even if it is clear, it will just make it even further clear, right? So that's my take on it. Okay, then you, right, just want to add a comma where in your writing you would want to add a slight pause. So in fact, I'll remove the commas. So you have the sentence over here: we had in fact lost all our money. And right, if I write it out without the commas, you can read it in one go. We had in fact lost all our money. That's a statement. It's right, just simple, straightforward. I mean, you could set the tone with whatever's coming before and after, right? So with context, but not in this line itself. But if I add commas, and that would add a slight pause. We had, in fact, lost all our money. And so, right, that sets the tone of how this would be read. And so that also perhaps given the context conveys certain emotion or certain feeling, or it expresses the line in a particular way, right? So we obviously take pauses when we are talking, just like I did right now. Now that could have been a full stop in writing, that could have been a comma. So obviously I don't have punctuations floating above my head when I'm speaking. My tone and my right intonation and all of those, uh, they reflect whatever it is, right? Whether I'm stopping, whether it's a complete sentence or not. And so if you want to represent that in writing, right, you have these punctuation marks. In this case, the comma to represent a pause. Okay. Then we already talked about using commas with clauses, right? So, so using commas with clauses, we had the main, the comma after the coordinating, before the coordinating conjunctions, and then the comma with the subordinate clauses, right? So that's already covered earlier. And then you have commas to separate what are called grammatically relative clauses. But, right, you could just simply say to separate additional information. And so an example for that, right now you got this sentence. The new teacher who had a master's degree was a subject specialist. Now, if you take a look at it, what I really want to say is that the new teacher was a subject specialist. And so what I'm going to do is the part where I'm saying the teacher had a master's degree, I'm going to isolate that in the sentence using commas. And so, right, it might give the effect that I'm adding a pause, but what it's also doing is that it's separating this particular information and highlighting it as, oh, well, this is not the focus of the sentence. The focus of the sentence is that the teacher is a subject specialist. Then you have commas used with speech, right? And so basically used with direct speech. So when you have something like, what did Faisal do? He replied, let's keep it simple, right? And so you're using direct speech, and then Faisal replied, my ankle twisted. And so you want a comma over here. If this is called the reporting word, right? So it could be replied, it could be responded, it could be, uh, just said, as is the one that's mostly used. Of course, using different ones add variety and accuracy as to what's happening in the conversation. Or just using said for everything isn't the best option. And so you want a comma after the reporting verb and before the actual direct speech in the inverted commas. In this case, or if the speech is coming in first, right? So I've got a full stop over here and then the inverted comma is closed. If the speech is coming in first, my ankle twisted. So in this case, I put a comma over here and Faisal replied. And then there's a case where you've got a longer speech and you sort of include this part in the middle. and so then you'd have commas. Uh, so I don't think, comma, she said thoughtfully, comma, I don't think it'd be a problem. And so with that, right, we looked at three different ways in which you could present your direct speech. There are certain other ways as well, right, with the speech, going into details. Moving on, right, I'll just quickly cover, I mean, right, you could use all of them, but I want to just, get this done in this particular class. And so, right, you got the colon, and it is used to introduce lists, introduce lists, right? Not items in the list, but introduce lists, such as, right, so those are just three random things that came to mind, whatever reasons you're giving. And so you got a colon over here to introduce that. There are certain other uses for the colon as well. Then you've got the quotation marks. Now, the quotation marks, right? You got the double and the single. And today you can use either, right? There used to be a difference between when and where to use these. And today, if you're just being technical, that difference would still apply. But for general use, they're the same. And so, how would you use them? You're obviously using them in direct speech, which we covered. So, since we just talked about that, I'm not going over it again. Right? And you could use it to highlight certain words, right, that you're either quoting or, right, whether you like, for example, the apology didn't seem genuine. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting this word not as a quote, but, right, in the sense that I find it questionable, right? I'm raising questions about the apology. So that's right. Another way quotation marks could be used, as I mentioned, right, whether using single or double, it doesn't really matter uh, for general use. And then you have the dashes, right? That would be, in fact, the last point to cover. Oh, so I'll just give another example over here for something that you're quoting. And so this is not direct speech, right? The last chapter is titled Until Next Time, right? And so over here I'm quoting the name of the title only. And so that's what I've put in the inverted commas. And just keep in mind that, right, if you're using single, then they should be single on both sides. If you're using doubles, then there'd be doubles on both sides. Okay, finally come the dashes. Now, I'm not going into the detail of them being called the M dash or the N dash or the hyphen, right? We're just doing dashes. And so they have, uh, right, a variety of uses. One is that they're used in a similar way as the comma to separate additional information, right? Now, in this case, right, depending on where that additional information is coming in, for like it's not something you can do with the comma, but you can do it with the dashes. You can either, you know, use one or two dashes or multiple dashes, uh, depending on how the sentence is structured. So you have, right, to highlight additional information in the sentence. And so one example, our teacher, and you've got this dash, who often gets cross when we're late, wasn't cross at all. So again, similar to the comma, if I can replace this with a comma, it will still work. And that, sort of tells you that in some cases, punctuation marks are also interchangeable. You could use one in place of the other and it would work, right? There are certain cases for this. It's not like you could replace any punctuation with the other, obviously, but it could be done. Now, which one you choose to use really depends on the effect you want to give. I feel that putting in a dash is more prominent compared to a comma. So if you really want to highlight that extra information, then use a dash. If you want it to be more subtle, right, then use a comma. So there is a difference in using them, right? And so the actual information I want to give you is our teacher wasn't cross at all, right? The addition information is that, who always does get cross meaning, angry, you could say, or displeased. And so the teacher would often get cross when they're late, but in this case, right, that it didn't happen. Then another example where there's only one dash coming at the end. And so you're saying this when you're leaving someone's house after, dinner, perhaps. Okay. Uh, what else do we have? Uh, right, the dash can be used to make compound. In that case, that's actually a hyphen. So compound words. And so examples of those are brother-in-law, and the numbers when you're written in words, such as 74, right? And right, certain words that, like for example, I think 74 years old, so 74 years. And then you've got some with uh, right, some suffixes or prefixes. And right, why I'm telling you this, because if you're familiar with compound words, then uh, whether they're nouns or adjectives, right? An example of an adjective would be well written. And so because they're compound words, they count as one, right? So this is something that would be particularly useful for you guys in your summary task, right? If you can sort of sneak in compound words into your summary, you'd save on a few words, and that would really help, right? Just because the summary task has a strict word limit. Okay, so those are all the punctuations that you should care to know. And if you practice them in your writing, then something as simple as just using these punctuations properly will really improve the quality of your writing overall, especially given as to how dismal uh, writing has become nowadays, where students just don't pay attention. They think just by writing something on paper they've achieved, like that they've unlocked a new level or something, and that's just not true, right? So try to put these punctuation to practice, especially the more common ones, right? The full stops and the capitalizations and the commas, even if you don't use the others, right? If you just use the full stops, the capitalizations, and the commas properly, you would have a decent piece of writing. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, so then that's all for the class, and I'll see you guys after winter break, right? So I'll see you guys in January, inshallah.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.